Hello there, Rotoballers, and welcome back to the NFL DFS preview show for Week 5. This week, I'm going to be joined by Eric Samulski. Eric, how's it going, man?
Good, Dan. Just watched my Red Sox beat the Yankees last night. So even if they get smoked the rest of the way, good to go. And then I got my Bills playing the Chiefs on Sunday night. So I think it's going to be a good week of sports. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was feeling I kind of was rubbing some salt in the wound week 1 when the Steelers beat the Bills. And now, 3 weeks later, it's like the Bills are just destroying everyone and the Steelers have fallen apart into obscurity. So you're going to have the last laugh there, I feel.
Yeah, who knows? I kind of feel like it might have been one of those sports things, where it's like there's no quantifiable evidence to suggest it's real, but maybe the Bills needed that loss to like wake them up and be like, listen, You're not just going to like show up and beat teams again.
Right. That makes sense.
So who knows?
And the Steelers probably aren't going to be at this bad forever. I don't know. I'm hoping that the defense keeps them in some games and that they figure it out. But that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about Week 5 of NFL DFS for FanDuel and DraftKings. Before we start, just a little bit about me. I lead our content team for NFL and do some of the premium content here with our cheat sheets as well as our anchor plays. Eric, what are you doing for NFL this season?
Yeah, so I do a weekly defense rankings and tiers. So defense is kind of my main focus. And then I do a weekly waiver wire show on our YouTube channel, which you should subscribe and check out, where I basically just pit the top waiver wire targets against each other and break it down that way. And then I do a lot of, DFS content and editing our videos. So definitely, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're continuing to kind of grow and put out new content on the YouTube channel every day, every week. So it'll be a lot of stuff for you if you subscribe and check it out.
And check us out on TikTok too. I know you and I have been doing some videos over there as well as from other staff on TikTok, trying to expand into that realm, which can be fun and scary.
Yeah, but, sure. It's unique. Yeah,
it's unique, no doubt. I just want to mention really quickly before we get back into football that our NBA season is starting. I've been covering the preseason here at Rotoballer and trying to get everybody excited for NBA kickoff. Our NBA premium package is available, gives you access to our in-season tools, our optimizers, our rankings, our draft kit for all of you that are drafting here in the next few weeks. So check us out. Season packages, really great deal there. Save 10% off with my promo code ThunderDan. And with that, let's, Eric, talk about football. We've started the show off lately by going through a quick review of the previous week with some studs and duds. I was really excited last week to see Cordell Patterson do well because we talked about him on the show. I never expected him to have 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, that game. Yeah.
But we hit on Patterson. We hit on Justin Jefferson, who had a good game despite the Vikings not doing much. Jonathan Taylor, we mentioned on the show, had a big game. And then even DJ Moore as chalk still went off. And I had a pretty decent week, to be honest. I played more GPP than cash last week because I didn't really like my cash builds. And so it was a good week for me. A few duds, and then I'll let you jump in here. Big dud for me was Kelsey. I had a few lineups where Kelsey was my lowest scoring player, which was incredibly frustrating. And then Kirk Cousins I kept touting him on the show last week. And I thought really the Vikings would be able to do more, but that Browns defense looked pretty legit. So he was one of my other big busts. How about you, Eric? I know you had a couple good lineups you sent in the writers group the other day.
My best lineup was my cash. I played it also in some multiplier lineups. So I think if people out there are cash game players, you like building a cash lineup, not just the 50-50s, but also the multipliers are a good contest for you. You can hit the 10-time multipliers, which I did with a cash lineup that, had Henry and it had Hurts and it had DJ Moore. So I had those guys kind of prop up. Oh, Cordell Patterson. So I had those guys kind of prop up, Devontae, who is, I guess, one of my big busts. I played him in a lot of my cash lineups. And, I guess I should have played Randall Cobb.
Yeah, right. Who knew that?
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you for sharing that. I mean, it definitely was, I think, a better week. I had a real rough week in week 3, better week for us. And I feel good about the process, especially when I start to incorporate now in week 5, we have more data and more sample size with this season. And I'm not relying on last year so much. We start to feel a little more confident about our process. So looking at one of the first things I like to do here, is look at some of the game totals. And there are 5 games. I usually try to pick the top 4 or 5 games with pretty solid totals this week, although a lot of the highest scoring projected games are primetime games, whether it's the night or Sunday night. So we are left with Giants and Dallas at 52 points, well ahead of the pack there. We have Green Bay and Cincinnati at 50.5. We have Arizona, San Francisco, 50.5, Minnesota and Detroit at 49, and then Jacksonville, Tennessee at 48. I know you have another game that I didn't list there that you really want to talk about. But of those 5, is there one that you really like or that stands out to you?
I mean, it's, obviously it's easy to say I like the one with the highest point total. I do like, the Giants and the Cowboys. I know you're going to talk about that one a little bit. So I will say, I also really like Arizona, San Francisco.
Yes.
I think those are 2 suspect secondaries. The San Francisco 49ers secondary has been a little beat up by injury, and Arizona has, they've performed relatively well, but I still question the consistency and talent of that secondary. I do think that game could weird shootout. And, I like a lot of pieces, and I think that, you can play the typical, Kylers and DeAndre Hopkins, George Kittles, but I do think there are a lot of ways if you decide to play that game that you can, veer off and play, AJ Green,
right?
Play some of the 49ers running backs, play Brandon Ayuk, and you can differentiate. So I think there's a lot of pieces in that game that make it unique for me.
Nice. Yeah, I like the game a lot too. It's probably my second favorite after the obvious one, the Giants and Dallas. I really don't think you should get away from that game in cash. And we're going to talk about some of those guys in cash formats. But I also, when I crunched the numbers here earlier this week, there are some elite matchups for some of those players within that game. And I don't think it's something we can. I know Dallas and Chargers busted early this year, but I don't see Dallas and the Giants game busting this week as far as being productive. Why don't you go ahead with that other game that you liked? It wasn't in the top 5. I think it actually comes in like 7th or 8th in terms of total. Your favorites?
Yeah. So one of my favorite stacks is actually in the Carolina-Philadelphia game. And I know it's not a super high point total. I think it was like 45.5 last time I looked. Yep. But what I like about it is that there are a lot of explosive options in there. We already talked about DJ Moore as kind of like a cash game stalwart last week. He's been incredibly consistent, probably one of the most consistent wide receivers so far this season. And I don't think that we need to shy away from that, as you're mentioning in GPPs. I do think that the points are going to be scored, and they're going to come from a certain number of people. So you can go with Darnold and DJ Moore, and then run it back with Devonta Smith, who's been used as a wide receiver 1, but hasn't had the production follow. But I think that it's going to come at some point in time. You could obviously keep Devonta Smith and use Jalen Hurts. And it's not always pretty, but he gets it done, especially with the rushing yardage. You can bring it back with DJ Moore in that lineup. If you're playing like a smaller field tournament, you want to differentiate. Robbie Anderson got back on track last week. I think that maybe people wrote him off a little bit too quickly. So you could even go Darnold, Moore, and Anderson and bring it back with somebody. And also you could throw in Kenneth Gainwell for the Eagles. I mean, he is their clear passing down back. And if the Eagles are trailing in this game, which I think they might, or if they just decide not to run against the Panthers run defense, which has been pretty good, Kenneth Gainwell at 4,900 on DraftKings could get you good value if you were going to do a Panthers stack and then bring it back with Gainwell on the Eagles side. So I think there's a lot of ways to play with that game that I really like.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing game. I wasn't totally on my radar. Obviously, DJ Moore should always be on your radar every week at this point. And of course, McCaffrey, like whenever he comes back, he'll have to be firmly on our radar. But yeah, I am intrigued a little more with the Carolina side because, Philadelphia's defense, I know they had a couple of real tough matchups with Dallas and the Chiefs, but man, they haven't really been stopping anybody lately. And I watched that Eagles game last week, and they were getting the ball run all over them by Edwards-Helaire. And so I'm bringing into consideration here even Hubbard as far as a guy who is a value back. Who Sam Darnold vultured 2 rushing touchdowns last week from him. I mean, he had a real productive game, just didn't get in the end zone. If you want to kind of veer off from the Darnold Moore pairing. And then I agree with you that I think the Eagles are going to be forced to pass here. Carolina's a really good run defense, real tough DVOA rating, and so I think it's a Jalen Hurts game, and stacking him with some of his receivers or tight ends is likely your best option there.
Yeah, I do think that rushing. I mean, you mentioned the vulture touchdowns, but I think the rushing of Sam Darnold, it's been there more than just one game so far, and maybe it is something we need to consider. And if he's going to run a little bit, that only kind of elevates his floor. As a DFS quarterback.
Yeah, I played him a cash a few different weeks now, and he's played off really nicely because he does run the ball, and he's going to get a score here or there. All right, so those we kind of laid out the main games there. We can obviously talk about some players from some of those other games that we didn't mention that are going to come up just naturally here as we get through the different topics in the show. Our first real major topic here we want to cover is some of our cash game studs, guys that you should prioritize paying for in lineups. I'm going to throw one out there just because it's kind of an obvious question, but with Tennessee banged up, continuing to be banged up, is this another week where we just find the cap to jam in Derrick Henry, who had 35 some touches last week, and even when I thought he was busting, I looked up and he all of a sudden he ended up with 170 some yards and a touchdown. In a real ugly get lost to the Jets, he still was great value. So what do you think about Henry? Is he a guy you want to just smash in this week?
Yeah, I think I'm going to keep an eye on the practice reports with Julio Jones and AJ Brown. I don't necessarily think that even if they both played, I don't necessarily think that's going to change my mind totally on Henry. I'm willing to eat that chalk. I don't think that, the Jacksonville defense is particularly good. And I think that they're going to ride Henry. And I think, he's 10,400, I believe, on FanDuel, 9,000 on DraftKings. 9,000 on DraftKings isn't out of this world. When McCaffrey was really going strong, he was up over 10K and we were finding ways to put him in our cash game lineup. So I'm prepared to put Henry in my cash game lineup. I
think we should. And for now, I mean, things could always change as the week goes along, but I think he's a guy you should start with there. Is there someone else that you were leaning towards as another? It could be a receiver, it could be a back, really at either position that you feel like is kind of a necessity for cash or a good cash building block.
Yeah, another running back that I think is being boosted by injuries is Saquon Barkley. I know Dallas has a good run defense, or and actually a pretty good defense overall. So it may not be a traditional cash game play, but I'm looking at, usage. He's getting a crazy amount of carries. He's been up over, he's got, I guess not crazy amount of usage, not carries. He had 13 carries last week, 16 carries the week before, but he had 7 targets against Atlanta, 6 targets against the Saints. He's heavily involved in the passing game, which could remain consistent if Slayton and Shepard and those guys are out. I think that Dallas's defense is good, but I don't think it's something you have to full avoid. So I know, Zeke is definitely an option in that game as well, because he's another guy getting pretty consistent usage, but I like Barkley a little bit more because I don't have to worry about competition in the backfield. Yeah. And I think, Zeke has been getting the touchdowns the last couple of weeks, but I think on one of those plays, like Tony Pollard was out at the 1, and then Zeke punched it in. So that could drastically change that. So I do like Saquon if you're looking for another running back up at the top.
I like that. I like that you went with Barkley's firmly on my radar. Like you said, he hasn't been getting a ton of carries, but he has been very involved in the pass game. And that's really where he excels too. Like when they get in the ball out in the flat, or they have designed screen passes for him, he's just electric in space. So hopefully they do that. They'd be smart to do that. And here's the thing. I think that game is going to put up numbers, even if the Giants are playing from behind. And we saw even when the Eagles were playing from behind a few weeks ago, the Hurts still put up plenty of points and plenty of yards in a kind of a trailing game script. So Barkley is a great play. I do think Zeke and cash makes a ton of sense. I know there's concerns about Pollard eating into it, but man, they've been feeding him and he looks good. I'm not even a big Zeke truther by any means, or a huge Zeke fan, but he looks good. The line is blocking well. That's to me one of the biggest disadvantages is Dallas offensive line is just hammering people. Someone brought up to me recently, like after week 1, I think everyone thought, boy, the Cowboys are just going to throw it air Prescott this year. But that was really only a product of that game and that matchup with Tampa Bay. Since then, they've really tried to featured the run game, and I think they're trying to be balanced, and they're not put it all on deck. So I like Zeke. I like smashing Zeke and Henry into cash. I think it's pretty easy to do on DraftKings, to be honest. It's like, 7,000 and 9,000. Like,
I know it's not that hard. And I think you bring up a good point about the running game. A lot of people who are smarter than me about utilization and game script have pointed out that, everybody was talking about how pass happy the Cowboys offense was. And that was because the games that they played with Dak last year, they were trailing a lot. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a really large sample size of a Dak-led offense in positive game scripts. And so now we're seeing that, and now we're having to readjust that they are running the ball a little bit more than maybe we anticipated coming in.
Yeah, I totally agree. So there's some good backs there. A guy I want to just mention, and well, you know what? I'll save him for later. We'll get to some running backs here in a minute. Let's move from the top price guys to some value plays that maybe are cash friendly. I'm just going to throw out there that Curtis Samuel is min price, still $3,000 on DraftKings. And despite only playing a handful of snaps last week, he still got 4 targets, 4 catches, and a pretty nice target share of the targets when he was in the game. So it would only make sense for them to ramp up his involvement and get him more involved. He's obviously a dynamic player. What do you think? Is Samuel safe in cash at $3K?
For sure. And I think also that depends a lot on, Logan Thomas left that game banged up. Right. And I think there's a huge question of whether he plays or not. And if Logan Thomas doesn't play, Samuel has really operated in a lot of the underneath passing game throughout his career. So I think that he could be, I know everybody wants to see the deep shots and stuff, but I think he could be a great asset for you if he needs to be the chain mover and he needs to operate underneath. So I like Curtis Samuel. I also like Laviska Shenault. Keep an eye on those practice reports too. They claim that, in practices this week, even without DJ Chark, he's been operating as the slot receiver, and Tavon Austin is listed as the outside receiver. I'm not ready to go to Tavon Austin. I'm sure I haven't even checked his price. I'll look right now. I'm sure he's min priced as well. 3,000. But I do like Laviska Shenault and Marvin Jones Jr. as cash game plays. Tennessee has a really bad secondary, and I think Jacksonville's going to throw a lot. And I think that those guys are going to be strong options if you need to pay down a little bit at wide receiver. Nice.
I'm on board there too with both of those guys. And Shenault, we've seen him be used in the run game a little bit or on gadget plays and things. They like to get the ball in his hands. He's another one of these real, like a Cordarrelle Patterson type where like he's a weapon and like they just want to get him the ball in space. So I like that call. All right. So we're going to do things a little bit different this week. We're going to go right down through the positions here and just kind of rapid fire hit some guys at each position. Let's start with quarterbacks. I think the obvious thing to say here is that we could start with Dak and Daniel Jones in that high total game. For me, I prefer Daniel Jones on between the two just for the savings in cap and the fact that he has been running a lot, right? His running floor is there. And if we are playing with the Cowboys are leading, Giants have to throw kind of a game script that he is naturally going to end up with a lot of attempts and in that situation. So I'm going to throw those two out there first, Dak and Daniel Jones. How about some other guys from different games, Eric?
Yeah, I think the obvious one in cash, if you have the money to pay up for it, is Kyler. I think Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, they're all not on the main slate this week. That really does leave Kyler as kind of like the QB1 to me. So I think if, he's up at 8,000, I think if you can afford that, you build around like Kyler and Henry, and then you got to pay down in some other places, whether it's a Curtis Samuel shot, who knows? Mm-hmm. So that's an option. I do like the Daniel Jones and Dak plays. I'm going to go back to Sam Darnold. I think that Darnold at 6,600 on DraftKings is a pretty good play. And then I think if you're going to pay down, keep an eye on practice reports, but Trey Lance. Right. I think if you want to pay down at quarterback, he's 5,700 on DraftKings. He didn't look particularly good. If you're studying like quarterback game film, but he scored over 20 points and a half. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for. Right. So I think, the matchup against Arizona is one where, he'll probably throw some interceptions. He won't look great, but he's going to run. They're going to air it out a little bit. And I think that he could have one of those ugly 25-point games which if I'm paying 5,700 is pretty good.
Yeah, he's like a dual threat guy that can run a little bit, and yeah, we certainly have to see if he play. If he plays, then that's going to end up likely being a popular pay down option. There's a couple other cheap guys I just want to throw out there, and one of them is Jacoby Brissett, who I did play a little bit last week, if against a kind of a pass funnel defense of Tampa Bay. Maybe not the best matchup, but has performed pretty well on his the two starts that he's made. And then the guy that no one really ever wants to play is Goff, right? He's facing Minnesota this week and is super cheap. I think 5,200, right around there on DraftKings. And you can say what you want about the Lions. They're scoring points. They're moving the football. Even Goff is someone I think you consider paying down for. All right, so running backs, we already hit on a couple big name guys. The guy that I've been waiting to bring up here would be Nick Chubb. All right, I was all over Chubb last week, and I was very frustrated because it was a good matchup. He ended up getting 100 yards, but they fed Kareem Hunt on the 1 yard line and took away his and vultured his touchdown. So he had a serviceable score, but obviously it would have been a much better day if he gets in the end zone. They dropped his price. He's down to 6,700 on DraftKings, and he's facing the Chargers, who have been gashed on the ground this season. I think that's a big mismatch that I don't know if I trust him in cash because of the Hunt timeshare, but I really do like that play in tournaments.
I think that's a good GPP play. I was thinking about, I think it's a great play. I caution people not to, make a decision about the Chargers run defense by watching, Josh Jacobs run behind that, Las Vegas Raiders offensive line Monday. They looked like they couldn't run anything, but every other team has fared pretty well against the Chargers. I do really like that call. I think a cash game play I really like is Fournette. Mm-hmm. Miami has a pretty good secondary, so I think that that Tampa's going to run a lot, and we saw that basically Fournette picked up all of the Gio Bernard work, right? Because Bernard was hurt. Ronald Jones basically didn't see any more of the field than he did before. Fournette was heavily involved in the passing game. At some point, you're watching that game going, Brady has 3 tremendous wide receivers, and they're going to try to win this game on wheel routes to Leonard Fournette. But if they're going to throw those, then you know what? I'll play them.
Yeah, no doubt.
And at 5,200, I think that's a real, good RB2 in your cash game. If you want to get Henry, if you want to get Kyle, or if you want to get some of those other guys. Yeah,
I like the Fournette call too. I'm on him. It was the same spot that we, Frank and I were on last week with Jonathan Taylor, where it's a run funnel. They do have a good secondary, and they are poor against the run. So if Tampa Bay is smart, they won't force it, and they will just kind of feed Fournette. And of course, if they're up, they have a positive game script and they want to run the ball, that favors him as well. Another guy I want to throw out there, obviously kind of a development here this week, is Damian Williams, right? With Montgomery going on the shelf there. For Chicago, what do you think about Williams? I don't know if you would call him cash game worthy, or if you want to keep him as more of a GPP play.
I think I'd rather actually play him in cash because I don't love that offense. So I don't necessarily think that he has the highest ceiling, even if he winds up taking 100% of the work, which I'm not sure he will. I know people keep talking about Khalil Herbert, but I think that Williams is going to get the majority of that work. He's shown he's capable in the pass game in the past. They ran him a lot last week when Montgomery went down, and they've run him. He's been the primary backup, so I think they're going to run him. There's been no real mention that his quad injury is going to keep him out. I think he just bruised his quad. He's apparently going to be fine. So I'd rather play him in cash, where if he gets me like 14, 15, 16, 17, I feel pretty good about it, but I'm not looking for some massive week. Yeah. And at 5,600, I think that's a pretty good price for him. I will bring up, just because we're in this running back section, again, I think Kenneth Gainwell, who I mentioned before, is a good play for GPPs at 4,900. I would not play him in cash, but I do think that, that's a pretty good option in GPPs if you're looking to pay down. At running backs, you can pay up at other positions. I think that, there's the opportunity that if it becomes a pass game, that he can put up, pretty big numbers as a primary pass catcher in that offense.
Nice. Yeah. The thing with Damian Williams, just to circle back to him, is just the Chicago offense has I don't have a ton of faith in them. They haven't been very good. whether it's been Fields or Dalton. But honestly, they have a good matchup. Las Vegas is not good, but I just don't know how much I trust them. Monty had a big game last week, but like the Lions also were like a dream matchup there. So it's a fairly neutral matchup to a little bit above average. So I'm a little iffy there. I don't know if I want to prioritize them when there's other stud backs that I would like to kind of cram. I like paying up a running back when I can.
Yeah. I may unintentionally fade that. I unintentionally faded Chuba Hubbard last week. I wasn't actively trying not to get him into lineups, but it wasn't a great matchup to me, and it didn't excite me. And the value was fine, but not great. And I'm kind of looking at that, with Damian Williams now. It's not like Montgomery got hurt at practice and Williams is down at 4K. I mean,
right.
He's 5,200, or 5,600. It's cheap, but it's not. I'd much rather play Fournette. So I think if I'm looking in a cash game lineup, I'm just going to keep pivoting to Fournette. And also, only $500 more than Damian Williams is DeAndre Swift. And I know Swift let people down last week, but he's getting more and more usage every single week. I think, that he was at like 73% of, running back snaps last week. And Minnesota is not a defense that scares me. So if I'm building a GPP lineup and, I'm at 5,600 for Damian Williams, or I'm at 61 for DeAndre Swift, I'm going to try to get up to DeAndre Swift. I know he has that passing down work, and I'll take savings somewhere else, the wide receiver position, tight end, defense, wherever.
With you 100% on Swift too. We were all over him last week, and I was bummed that he busted, but he's still a stud, and I think he's going to have some big games this year. All right, let's talk about wide receivers. Okay, there's a lot of guys here in play, a lot of great receivers. At the top, though, let's start with the big question of Davante Adams. I know he kind of busted last week for you, and Randall Cobb got all those touchdowns, but it's a pretty good matchup against Cincinnati secondary this week. What do you think about Davante Adams?
Go back. I'm going back to it. Who cares?
Go back. Right?
I'm going back to it. Listen, the Steelers are a solid defense. The Steelers they know how to scheme. They look good against the Bills early on too. Like, I think the Steelers just took away Adams, and Rodgers didn't care because he had Randall Cobb all day, every day.
Right.
And no offense to you, but it's not like the Steelers are a great team, so they didn't really have to force feed Adams. I'm going back to Davante Adams this week as a cash game play. We mentioned him before, but I think that, the floor of DJ Moore has proven to be really high. I think he's another good cash game play. And then also up at the top, I think that DeAndre Hopkins blow up spot is coming at some point in time.
Right.
I know it might be iffier cash game because there's so many options there, but I do really like DeAndre Hopkins this week at 7,600. I don't really think that the San Francisco secondary is going to be able to contain him. So I'm willing to go there in both cash and GPP.
That's awesome. I mean, those high dollar wide receivers, you almost every week have to stay there and play for GPPs because of the ceilings. If they have a 10 catch game or a 2 touchdown game, they're going to go crazy. I'm with you on Adams. We'll see about Hopkins. I'll see how much I want to spend up on that. I never would tell anyone not to play the Kyler Hopkins duo in tournaments, especially if there's enough value to cram them in and a couple other good studs. One guy that I kind of want to skip over the Giants and Dallas guys, just because we've talked about that game so much already. Obviously, you can play CeeDee Lamb, you can play Kenny Galladay, you could play Amari Cooper if you want. No one's going to tell you not to do that. There's a guy that I'm on this week that I'm wondering what you think about, and it's Jacoby Myers. There was a tweet I saw the other day of receivers who have at least 10 targets, averaging 10 targets a game, and he was one guy that popped on that list that gained my attention. And so the last 2 weeks, it's been 12 and 14 targets for Myers, and it seems like Mac Jones is really honing in on him as his main possession receiver. Against Texas, I remember against Houston, not a very good defense. Do you have interest in a reasonably priced 5,800, 5,900, something like that? Jacoby Myers this week.
You mean Jacoby Myers, the QB1 of the New England Patriots?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I like him. I think I'd play him more in GPPs because I'm a little worried that, and we'll get to it because it's part of my favorite GPP pivot play later, but I'm a little worried that New England doesn't really need to throw a lot against the Texans. So I'm a little worried that they go back to being a little bit of a ball control offense. They played two really good run defenses the last 2 weeks. So I think that's why you were seeing Mac Jones air it out a little bit more. So yes, I like Jacoby Myers. I think he's more of a GPP play. And I do want to mention one wide receiver in that Cowboys Giants game that we didn't talk about yet, and it's Kadarius Toney. And that's a GPP play only right now. But just watch and see what happens with Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard injury news. Kadarius Toney had 9 targets last game. He had 6 catches for 78 yards. Sorry, he was their first round pick. He looks pretty shifty with the ball in his hands. So I think if the Giants are short at wide receiver again, I think Toney could be a good wide receiver play for you if you really want to pay down. And I do want to just real quick on wide receivers, since the reason why I said your Jacoby Brissett call was good is because I think that Devontae Parker and Jalen Waddle are both really strong plays. I'd also actually maybe even consider them in cash. They're cheap, and Tampa Bay was really banged up in the secondary before going into the Patriots game, and then they lost Carlton Davis. He's apparently out for a few weeks. And Antoine Winfield Jr. had a concussion, so we don't know if he's going to come back for this game. Also, I think it's convenient that the Patriots released Stephon Gilmore today, and the Bucks and Tom Brady are down so many cornerbacks. He's probably definitely going to sign with them. But for this week, I really think you can pick on that Tampa secondary because you can't run on them.
Right.
So I kind of think the Dolphins passing game is there's some sneaky options in play this week.
Yeah, I think I like Parker a little more just for the upside. Jaden Waddell's been really like a possession guy, a low ADOT on his targets, but and he kind of busted last week, but the week before he had a ton of targets.
And Will Fuller broke his finger, so I think it's just going to be those two guys this week.
Pretty much, I'm with you. Let's use that as a real natural pivot to go into tight ends here, because if we're talking about the Dolphins passing game, Mike Gesicki came through for me last week, second straight week with a touchdown and a real solid performance from him. He is a guy I have circled. Since we don't have Travis Kelce on the slate, we don't have, I guess we do have Waller. My God, can't think of Waller up there. But we don't have like that Travis Kelce pay up this week. Who are some other tight ends that you're looking at? Maybe some value guys as well.
Yeah, tight end is interesting this week. Listen, if he plays George Kittle at 5,600, if you're looking for cash game options, I really like. He had 11 targets last week. I know that the results weren't there, but we've seen the talent. We know the talent. So I think that, if you're going to keep giving George Kittle 11 targets, at some point in time, that's going to hit. He has a calf injury, so I'm going to keep my eye on that. I'm also willing to go back to TJ Hawkinson at 5,500. I know we talked about it with Swift. The Lions didn't have a good game last week from a fantasy perspective. I think they're going to need to score some points to keep up with the Vikings. They didn't really have to kind of put the pedal to the metal last week. And then, listen, I think maybe Dalton Schultz is a thing. The last couple of games, it's 8 targets last week, 7 targets the game before. So I think that, I kind of expect Dallas to handle the Giants. So I think that maybe they don't have to push the ball downfield a lot to the wide receivers. And Dak seems to like throwing to Schultz when they get into a little bit more of a conservative offense. So Dalton Schultz. And then the last one I'll throw out, if you're going to pay down a little bit, is Tyler Conklin. He didn't hit a lot last week, but he had 6 targets. He's running over 70% of the snaps. And that's for 2 weeks in a row at 3,500. I think that there's a relatively safe usage floor with Conklin. So I think that that's another play that I'm interested in.
Yeah, nice. I was on Conklin last week too, and he didn't have the game that I was expecting, but obviously we saw 2 weeks ago that he can bust out in a big way when he gets the ball. So here's the thing with Dalton Schultz. The Giants suck against tight ends. They're not good. And we've noticed that he's been eating into the target shares, from Cooper and Lamb. So I actually have Schultz circled kind of above those Dallas receivers in terms of priority. Zeke, Schultz, and then probably the receivers after that. Evan Engram is a guy that we can maybe still consider. I know he hasn't really done it yet, but like you mentioned, if Shepard and Slayton are out, he's got to be involved, especially if they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. Yeah, overall, tight end is just not that strong this week. It's kind of a rough position, and you find your guy that you feel good about and go with. Anything else on tight end before we go?
Yeah, just real quick as a punt play in GPP, Cole Kmet is down at 2,700. He's been playing a lot. Like he has taken over a very huge role in that offense in terms of routes run. They only threw 17 passes last week. I think they're going to need to throw a lot more against the Raiders because the Raiders offense is a pretty good offense. So I like Cole Kmet if you're going to punt down at that position in GPPs.
Yeah, he's such a talented guy. If they can ever give him the ball, he's gonna do it. All right. We want to start to get to the end of the show here. We have a couple more segments. We're going to go with defense. All right, you're the defense guy. I had you on this week, so we had to talk about defense. Give me a couple of defenses you're looking at for DFS.
Yeah, listen, I like paying down. I played the Jets at stone minimum last week, and they got me 7 points on DraftKings, which is fine. That's enough, right? If I'm going to pay down again, I'll go for the Texans. The Texans defense has actually been okay this year. They're getting, relatively solid pressure. I don't necessarily think that the New England offense is really all that good. So at 2,300, I'm willing to pay for the Texans. The Chargers at 2,700. I think that defense is good. They look good against the Raiders. That pass rush with Joey Bosa can get after the quarterback. Baker Mayfield didn't look good at all last week. I know that the Browns will try and run, but I do think that that the Chargers can be a good play. And then I also really like the Raiders, who we also saw on Monday night. I think that pass rush is also pretty legitimate. We saw Chicago give up boatloads of stacks in Justin Fields' first start. Fields hasn't looked great so far. I just don't really trust this offense. And now David Montgomery is out. What are we going to get from Damian Williams? So at 2,900, I really like the Raiders, and that's without having to, pay up with some of these other options. I would urge people, I'm not on the Titans. I'm not on the Falcons. Falcons aren't on the slate. I'm not on the Titans. I think that, bad defenses are bad defenses.
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to pay, almost $4,000 for a Titans defense that did nothing against the Jets. Now they're going to play the Jaguars, who I think are a better offense than the Jets. So I'm fully off of that play.
Yeah, I hope people by now are starting to realize you pay down at defense. Like, regardless of which side you play on, you don't necessarily play bad defenses, but you can play plenty of mediocre defenses, or you can play, good defenses that have tough matchups all the time. One team that you didn't mention, you mentioned the Chargers, but I like the Browns defense in that game too.
Yeah.
I was really impressed last week when they held the Vikings to 7 points. The Vikings, to me, are a really good offense, and the pass rush for them has been really good. The secondary has been better than I think a lot of people expected them to be. And so I do like Cleveland as a pretty cheap option at defense too. All right. We did touch on some of the GPP options, but anybody else for GPPs that you want to throw out there at any position, any price level, just a pivot, get off the chalk?
Yeah, so I'll just bring up again. I think Robbie Anderson is a GPP pivot, especially if you're doing like a Sam Darnold stack. And then the guy I mentioned I was going to talk about before. I think Damian Harris is a pretty good GPP pivot. People are going to be off him because he's done nothing the last 2 weeks, but I think that's just been a factor of their opponents. He got 4 carries against the Bucs, and that was the most carries of any of the running backs. I don't think Brandon Bolden is their RB1. Ramondre Stevenson, they don't really want to play him. I think that, the Patriots are going to be up against the Texans and they're going to run. And I think that, this is not going to be a game where they're going to have to air it out a lot. So, I think most people aren't going to be on Damian Harris, and I like him as a GPP pivot that I would play.
Nice. All right. I'm going to throw one guy at you that is from a game that we like, but we didn't really talk about the running game here. We were talking earlier about Laviska Shenault and Marvin Jones, but what about James Robinson? To me, he has a pretty decent matchup here, and they have shown that after he kind of busted early on in the year, everyone was on in week 1 with when Travis Etienne went down, but then all of a sudden he's had a resurgence and he's come back, and so he's a guy that I have circled here as a running back that could go underowned or overlooked. At receiver, I'm looking at, we talked about most of these guys. I'm looking at my list here. I think we hit on just about all of them. Oh, I know. I want to say the Vikings passing game. All right, so Kirk Cousins didn't get there for me last week, but I got to go back to Captain Kirk. I know people think Detroit and they're going to run Dalvin Cook out there, whoever else out there, but I like the Vikings passing game against Detroit, who's just been bad pretty much in all facets of their defense. So why not go with the lower end of the two options there? All right, Eric, we're going to wrap things up here at the end. We're going to ask I'm going to ask you for a bold prediction. It can be an outcome of a game. It could be a specific player having a specific stat line. It doesn't matter to me, but be bold. The bolder, the better, and give us a bold call to take us out.
I don't know how bold it is. Let's say Leonard Fournette finishes as a top 5 running back on the slate.
Yeah.
And then I guess another bold prediction, if we're talking about injury replacement running backs, I think Samaje Perine finishes with more points than Damian Williams.
Okay. I like that too, because that's a pretty good matchup there. Packers run defense, not very good. Here's mine, and it's going to maybe be, I don't know, kind of chalky, but I think the chalk in the Dallas and Giants game is good chalk, and I want to kind of be overexposed this week. I think that game, which has a 52-point total, goes well over, I'm going to say 60, maybe even 65 points. Let's go, that total goes over 65, and we see a massive, 42-31 type kind of outcome in that game, and a lot of good fantasy performances.
Love it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being with me this week, Eric, and make sure you guys, like and subscribe here to our channel, and, give us some feedback. Like, what do you want to see? Drop us your favorite plays, whatever that might be. And make sure you keep following Road Baller for all your NFL DFS content. Thanks again, Eric.
See you later.
See you.